the landlubber of the average person. It looks like a flat expanse of all the sameness. But to these people here, there's a topography under that water and in the islands and the ledges and things that are out that is just as real as if you lived inland and you had your neighbor's house and you had this street and a park over here. Everything out there is named. A lot of these people who come into it from the land side or the government side or the planner side think that they're starting with a clean slate. They think that there's a clean sheet of paper and here we are, we're going to start this planning thing. But it's not the case. These places have a long history. Fishing has been here for over 400 years with Europeans. And Native Americans have been here, God knows, you know.
If you're a developer and you're going to put in some sort of wind energy or current energy and you're going to invest billions of dollars, it would be nice to know that there's not an ancient burial ground there that's at the end of the day require you to move. It would be to the federal government's advantage, to BOEM's advantage, you know, to the state's advantage and to investors and developers, and especially our tribes, to know where those sites are. And we need to do that research. But it gives us the advantage to fall back on that ancient history, but it also gives us the chance to plan for the future.
The Navy has been here really since the inception of the country. This has been our traditional training area. And so we've been doing this pretty much unobstructed for over 200 years now. In the past, we haven't had to worry about a lot of man-made obstructions offshore. With this new development in the oil and gas reserves as well as offshore windmill interest, we've had to start balancing, okay, where are these going to go? What are they going to interfere with? How is it going to impact our access? A lot of folks just think it's about ships. Well, really, we operate above the water, on the water, and under the water. Nothing worse than getting really advanced in the planning area, spend a lot of money, only to find out that, well, that's where the Navy drops some ordnance, or that's where the Navy does its submarine operations. And we believe that ocean planning is going to be the key, making sure that everybody is understanding of everybody's mutual interests and come up with an equitable solution.
There are decisions we need to make about what we want our marine ecosystems to look like. And this is unbelievable. There are zero no-take marine areas in the Gulf of Maine. There is nowhere that is completely sacrosanct. So we need these areas of replenishment that would have the chance to adapt to the change in climate and then carry the seeds for the new communities that will repopulate New England waters We have to strengthen and bolster the natural resilience as much as possible, so we go into this time of challenge as strong as we can be.
This is indeed a time of challenge, to begin serving the seas as they have long served us. The ocean's once boundless capacity as unparalleled provider of food, of livelihoods, of the very air we breathe, is reaching its limit. But on that same troubled horizon also comes a hopeful new spirit of collaboration. Unlikely alliances of would-be rivals and competitors, those who depend most intimately on the sea, are joining forces to take better care of the ocean. One such alliance is now taking shape off the coast of New England, where the legendary winds of the Atlantic itself are pushing the boundaries of ocean stewardship.
The region from New Jersey to Massachusetts has been called the Saudi Arabia of offshore wind. So we have thousands of gigawatts of energy, and not only is the wind really strong, but it's located very close to these enormous population centers on the East Coast. So the transmission link between that big energy resource and these big population centers is really quite easy. So the opportunity, not just for clean energy, but to create lots of great jobs, is really enormous here in the US for offshore wind.
If we look at our carbon footprint here in the United States, and we look at the energy that's generated and consumed by electricity, 78% of the electricity is consumed by 28 coastal states. So that means that essentially that energy demand is a coastal problem. And if we want to attack it, we need to start looking at energy sources that don't generate carbon footprints. We look at it from off-the-shelf technology that we can use today that would have any substantial impact that becomes wind energy.
The windy expanses of America's Atlantic coast are estimated to possess the untapped power to supply the region's entire needs for electricity, transportation, and heating, while cutting its greenhouse gas emissions by nearly 60%. But with the wind's great promise comes the challenge of fitting this new energy industry amid an already crowded ocean. A challenge being met by a cadre of pioneering planners in Rhode Island, the Ocean State.
I've had 30 years experience in marine permitting, and we've seen a lot of projects come through that have chosen sites that are inappropriate for various types of development, and that generates a lot of controversy when that happens. Our Office of Energy Resources wanted to develop a large-scale wind farm offshore, straddling both state and federal waters of about 200 turbines. And then they asked what our reaction was, and we told them they were crazy, they were going to get killed in any type of public process that we engaged in when we went forward. From there, we started to talk to them about shifting that into a planning process and developing what we call a special area management plan, but a planning tool that allows us to look at the entire area and consider that for all the potential sites, as well as the resources and the users that use that area.
Rhode Island saw opportunity in the challenge, not only to identify options for developing offshore wind power, but to prepare for the full gamut of impending demands upon the state's ocean waters. The state directed funding and a 2-year deadline for the Rhode Island Ocean SAMP, shorthand for Special Area Management Plan.
When we first started, many people in the Rhode Island community said, we don't want turbines and this is going to ruin our lives. So this is how we started the Ocean SAMP process. Now, URI has been involved in helping the state of Rhode Island make difficult decisions on coastal issues for over 50 years now. And so our group in particular has been able to build trust within, whether it be the municipalities, within to some degree the fishing community, marine trades, etc. And so we started by making a list of who do we think needs to be part of this process.
The list ran long, ranging from federal, state, and municipal agencies to labor unions and Indian tribes. It included fishermen and shippers, NGOs and environmental watchdogs, all focused on the immediate question of wind power, but ultimately looking for a say in their ocean's well-being.
It's really about looking at that natural ecosystem, looking at how people are using the ocean, and protecting and enhancing what's out there now, and promoting and encouraging other activities that are compatible to those efforts.
Many states have some form of coastal zoning, but only a few, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and Oregon, have developed comprehensive ocean plans.
Wind is one aspect of comprehensive marine spatial planning. Trying to decide, okay, is the area suitable for wind or is it more suitable for something else? At the start of the SAMP, there wasn't a lot of existing data. You know, that there had been a lot of mapping done in Long Island Sound. There had been a fair amount of mapping done in Massachusetts, and in the offshore waters of Rhode Island, very little had been done. Developers, their driving metric is, okay, what's the wind resource? Because that tells me how much power I'm going to make and how much money I'm going to make. If the wind speed doubles, you get 8 times as much power. So the first thing you determine is, okay, where's the wind? After that, the first thing you have to do is figure out, okay, where can we absolutely not build a wind project?
And we looked at what types of data we would need to put together that would be areas, for instance, that are no-go sites right out of the gate. So those would be things like navigation areas. They would be unexploded ordnance areas. They would be sites with severe geological constraints, those types of things.
The team then gathered information on spawning and nursery habitats, as well as other ecologically sensitive areas and hotspots for marine biodiversity. From there, they started charting the who, what, and where of Rhode Island's maritime patrons, from Navy sailors and industrial shippers to sailboat racers, scuba divers, and whale watchers, across an expanse of ocean nearly matching the size of the state itself. But when it came to accounting for one of Rhode Island's oldest seafaring communities, there came a snag.
It's very difficult to get fishermen to say anything beyond everywhere is important. We use everywhere.
I mean, I've worked long and hard to get what I know. Somebody might like to know what I know, you know, and go up and down the dock. Every single guy might say that. He's got his secrets. Am I thrilled about having to put what I know on the table to prove it? No, not at all.
We started out with the ocean SAMP. It didn't start off well. It was ugly. It was really ugly. We were pretty upset multiple times. Well, I've got a lot invested in this business. To have it, you know, pulled out from under me, I'm just going to be another one in the unemployment lines right now. You know, I mean, everything we have, you know, this old dock, I mean, you won't have anybody left here if this goes the wrong way.
You know, a few of us are going to have to pony up and say, hey, this is important to me and this is why. And somebody's going to have to show them why it's important. You're going to have to show them your grounds. So I decided I'd trust Grover and David enough to be able to give them access to that under full confidentiality, of course, you know. But hey, these are grounds that are important to at least the scallopers that I represent. You got to put your money where your mouth is at a certain point. You can't just have a bunch of guys running around saying that's my favorite spot. Sooner or later, you got to prove it. Unfortunate, but true. Sooner or later, you got to prove it.
Data that's been gathered by Deepwater Wind in terms of investigating.
Ultimately, the fishermen said to us, we want to help you site this because we want it to go in a place that's going to do the least impact to us versus you choosing a site and then we're going to have to try to live with it. And so that's essentially what occurred. They worked with us very closely, coming out with a mapping process that would allow us to focus in on sites that they had the least concern. Not that they didn't have any concern, but the least concern.
That's all we're asking for is a fair shake in this process. Just don't want to get run over by it. I've been able to meet with the people that are making the decisions. I've met from everywhere from our governor, You know, to Grover Fugate at CRMC, who's in charge of the SAMP process. Most important part is identifying the right area for a wind farm, so you're not ruining the resources, you're not messing up critical habitat.
We have to have conversations within the government, and we have to have the conversations directly with the developer. But none of this would happen without this sort of process. So, yeah, I think it's overall a good thing. It gets people going round and round and getting their needs on the table. Has to happen.
With fishermen gradually coming on board, Rhode Island was now able to designate a renewable energy zone in the most appropriate area, making room for the Block Island Demonstration Wind Farm.
So the Block Island Wind Farm will be located 3 miles to the southeast of Block Island in Rhode Island. It's a 5-turbine project. They produce a lot of power. 17,000 homes can be powered by the 5-turbine project. And we're building it because we don't have any offshore wind farms in the U.S. today. And there are over 50 offshore wind farms in Northern Europe right now with several thousand turbines in the water. The U.S. is way behind. In order to build the industry, we need to start building projects. We believe the best way to do that is to start with a small project to demonstrate that we can do it here in the U.S. And then we will be looking at larger and larger projects, just like they did in Northern Europe.
But there were other voices yet to be heard, whose ancestors were the first people to ever make a living on these shores. Under the guidance of John Brown, medicine man of the Narragansett Indian tribe, Doug Harris is charged to preserve the tribe's ceremonial landscapes.
The oral history of the tribe says that more than 15,000 years ago, the ancient Narragansett lived out where the ocean is now. Those villages overnight began to be inundated with water, and the people had to evacuate. That story was shared with the people, the stakeholders at the Ocean SAMP, and a year and a half later, the geologists working with the Ocean SAMP came back and said, well, you know what you said about 15,000 years ago? Well, the geological record would indicate that at least 24,000 years ago, what is now the continental shelf was an open vegetated plain. So science finally caught up to tribal oral history in terms of the realities of the ocean.
The siting for the Block Island Wind Energy Project straddles the ancestral homeland of the Manistee Band of the Narragansett Indian tribe. From the mainland shore to Block Island and all the water between, this is their historic neighborhood, now in need of new considerations. For Native American cultural sites by law are to be protected on land and in the sea.
Part of what you need to do before you install something really large in the ocean is figure out where you're going to install it and make sure that you're not installing your equipment, your cables and your foundations for the wind turbines on top of something that's already there. And that could be a boulder, but it also could be an important archaeological site that's submerged.
This Sinmar site is 23,000 years ago.
When we were working with the Narragansett Indian tribe, they became very interested in the possibility that there were tribal encampments in the offshore environment. Sea level was about 300 feet lower than it is today, so the shelf would have been dry, arable land that was capable of supporting populations in the offshore. The problem was that nobody really knew how to go about doing that. We started in a very rudimentary exercise of what's called paleo landscape reconstruction. So using the data that we had in terms of the sub-bottom data so that we could start to peel back, if you want, the sediment layers on the ocean so that we could see what that old landscape looked like. You can start to pick out the river channels, the lake beds, those areas where there might have been potential encampments.
Most of what we see out there is relict from when the glaciers were around a long time ago. We're talking about when this was land, about 24,000 years ago. And it's been subsequently inundated as the glaciers melted and went back into the ocean and sea level rose.
So our challenge is to find the elements of the old...
What scientists are looking for is the archaeological confirmation of the Narragansett Indian tribe's oral history. If somehow they should find the remains of an ancient civilization down there, one yet to be obliterated by rising waters and the depths of time. The prevailing textbook chronologies describing the first human footsteps in North America will be forced to backpedal some 10,000 years into the past.
We know every day history's being changed. We're finding species that we didn't know exist. Where people come from, did they come from western side of, the world, or did they come from the east, or both? I mean, these things are always in debate and always changing. They should never be put in stone. I'm very excited that we're taking the lead in these things. We're working with scientists, universities, and we are actually being able to rely on that traditional knowledge for once and bring that to the table.
The Block Island Wind Farm project gave us the opportunity, both with the archaeologists, Public Archaeology Laboratory, and the federal agencies and the state agencies, to better understand how we take what it is that we do on land out onto the ocean. And because Deepwater Wind was committed to best practices, it has been a relatively painless process. We have questions, they try to provide answers. If there are issues that we have, they try to provide solutions. And that's a good partnership.
Certainly the largest, if perhaps the rarest stakeholders in Rhode Island were those living beneath the waters.
The North Atlantic right whale is the most critically endangered whale species on the planet. There are approximately 400 animals left. Rhode Island Sound has been home to the most significant aggregations of North Atlantic right whale ever documented. We've had close to 100 right whales feeding in Rhode Island Sound and Block Island Sound in April.
Marine mammals are vitally dependent on sound for navigating and speaking among their kind. The very sort of communication in danger of being drowned out by ships and offshore development. The right whales venturing into Rhode Island Sound to feed suddenly faced a new dilemma.
Environmental organizations raised the concern to us that our initial construction schedule had us in the water with pile driving equipment just about the same time they believed that the North Atlantic right whale could be in the same area.
All sides were wanting to find a way forward for both wind energy and whales.
And for us, April wasn't on the table in Block Island. That was something we could not compromise.
We had the opportunity to sit down with some right whale experts from academic institutions here in the Northeast who shared a lot of data with us. And we were able to take that data, compare it to our construction schedule, and change our schedule, frankly, to accommodate the North Atlantic right whale.
We want to make sure that offshore wind succeeds in the United States. We believe that climate change is a real and significant threat, and that responding to climate change is going to require that we build offshore wind. That being said, we understand that with all energy sources, there are impacts. We have to do it right. The way to do that is to bring everybody who has an opinion about it to the table and to give them a voice, and to ultimately make your decisions based on science, based on data.
The gathering of data is at the heart of this groundbreaking study off the southern shore of Block Island, where fishermen and scientists are working hand in hand on the trawler Virginia Maurice.
Most of the people in the industry feel that it's necessary to see how these proposed wind farms are going to affect the resource. And the best way to do that is to come out here on a regular basis and get samples of what is actually here. I fish in this area quite often, so I know what should be here when we come I have an idea of what we should catch.
In collaboration with Coastal Vision and funding from Deepwater Wind, the independent nonprofit Ocean Science and Policy Group Sea-Plan is directing multi-year studies, collecting monthly data before, during, and after construction of the Block Island Wind Farm to determine its potential impacts on fisheries.
This is one of two big studies that we have underway. This is our groundfish trawl survey. We also have a lobster survey. And what we're trying to take a look at is to understand whether there are any impacts associated with the construction and operation of an offshore wind farm. Offshore wind farms have never been built in U.S. waters. So well before we put steel in the water here, we're going to know a lot about the groundfish populations in the lobster resources. And then when the construction happens, we'll be measuring those resources, and then for years after that. So it's a real, offshore wind's a pioneering industry, and this is a real pioneering study.
1.95, 1.7.
So we don't really know what to expect, but by looking at the Block Island project as a demonstration, we should be able to get a really good sense of what we're up against when they want to go put 200 of these turbines on our best fishing grounds that we have access to for the, the small inshore fishermen. We're hopeful that this will all work out and we can all get along, whether it's, with the wind farm developers and, everybody comes out as a winner.
I've been in the industry for 43 years, and the people in the industry seem to have faith in me doing the survey because of my experience, I guess, and they seem to trust my abilities to do things right, my desire to do things right. I want to make sure that the right information goes in for the benefit of my fellow fishermen and the people of Rhode Island.
What we learned from this project is going to be really helpful in how the region tackles regional ocean planning issues and decisions.
Butterfish, 31.
That, in my opinion, is a critically important piece of getting these offshore wind farms done in the U.S. Engaging with the tribes, engaging with commercial fishermen, with environmental organizations. And had we not done that work with them up front, and we proceeded to try to install the project, then we really would have had a problem. Because then we're looking at potential lawsuits and really expensive delays in installing the project. So spending the additional time and effort up front to engage the stakeholders so that we all agreed on the protocols and we all agreed how we were going to analyze the data made the most sense to us. The Ocean SAMP has saved us years of development work.
So it's absolutely good for business, no matter what business you're in. If you're in a marine business, taking into account the information so that you don't make stupid siting decisions is good business any way you cut it.
Founded on science, a shared sense of stewardship, and an alliance of unlikely allies, the collaboration in Rhode Island is leading the way towards a nationwide sea change in ocean conservation.
Often marine spatial planning is framed as dealing with a problem, but I see it as an incredibly exciting opportunity. I know this sounds a little Pollyanna, but what people may not realize is that we are confronting two of the greatest challenges facing global society, and now we have an opportunity to lick these challenges right in our own backyard and then spread what we've learned. And those two challenges are, one, to see the world as a system instead as a collection of independent pieces. And two, to fully value what we get from that system.
So we're at a current depth of 1344 meters. We launched the ROV this morning about 8:45, and we have been surveying the east wall of Black Canyon. We're currently about 100 miles off the coast of Rhode Island, pretty much due south.
We are working up our first wall transect. Large number of corals, including huge numbers of deep sea corals, probably some of the more densely populated wall face that we've seen on this cruise.
Most of the laws and approaches that we have right now to marine resource management deal with the ocean piecemeal. Fisheries deal with fishes one species at a time. We deal with economic sectors one at a time. And we know this is wrong. We do it this way because it's simpler. And we make the simplifying assumption that when you run cargo ships in and out of Boston Harbor, it has nothing to do with whales. Or that when you catch haddock, it has nothing to do with cod or herring. And we know that's not true. It's just been a big bite to get beyond that, to acknowledge that species compete with each other, and that whales get run over by boats very easily. If you make a simple intervention like restricting destructive fishing practices to places where they have the least impact, the entire system and everybody dependent on it will benefit. If you adjust shipping lanes so that they have minimal interference with marine mammals, the whale watch industry, the boating industry, the fishing and recreational fishing, they all benefit. So the key to making marine spatial management efficient is to back up and take a systems view.
Now that state ocean planning has been demonstrated successfully in Rhode Island and Massachusetts, the Northeast is embarking on comprehensive ocean planning for the entire region. And like their counterparts in Rhode Island, they are coming to grips with the complexity of a living ocean that knows no political borders.
And fishermen have asked that several times, is we don't know how all these projects connect to each other. We'd like to see a bigger picture. There's projects proposed for Massachusetts, right on the Mass-Rhode Island border, New York, New Jersey, Delaware, Virginia, all the way down the coast. They have these grand plans to put quite a few different projects up, wind farms. Fish don't know state boundaries, and they migrate up and down the coast, and our fishermen also don't know state boundaries. So many of the fishermen here in Rhode Island fish to the north of Rhode Island, fish to the south, as far down, probably up and down the entire coast, really, but the whole Northeast region anyway, you'll find Rhode Island fishermen targeting species that they look for to earn their income. I know it's a lot of work, I know there's a ton of meetings, and I get it, everyone's tired, but this is an important thing, and we can have all the fish in the world if we can't go get them because our areas are shut down, or they put all these things up in areas that we would normally go get those fish, then what good is all of this fisheries management stuff? So it's an important part for us to participate in, I believe that. It made sense to do it on a state level for us here in Rhode Island. It makes even more sense, in my opinion, to have a regional approach to that planning.
Rhode Island and Massachusetts' experience of using science and collaboration to solve conflicts over their state ocean resources is now being put into action across the entire Northeast region. Representatives from the New England states, Native American tribes, and the federal government are co-leading the regional planning for a marine world stretching 200 miles offshore.
BOEM is very much involved in the Northeast right now and in other regions in ocean planning. It fits in very, very nicely with our mission, which is to engage stakeholders and get everyone's input on which areas are the best for ocean energy development. This large area off North Carolina, that will shrink. So what's different now is that the federal agencies are communicating much more, not only with the states and other partners and tribes, but among ourselves. And so the real benefit to the marine planning that we see is the sharing of information, the sharing of scientific data.
That data is being shared with everyone through the Northeast Ocean Data Portal. Looking through the portal, we see a multitude of ocean uses: disposal sites, unexploded ordnances, pipelines, submerged cables, aquaculture areas, renewable energy zones, turtle migration routes, and whale feeding grounds. Looking through the portal, we see an ocean in need of sharing.
Let's say a potential developer comes in and they have a project in mind and they want to lease a specific area or offshore to do that project. The sooner they understand some of the constraints that are out there, and you'd be surprised, no matter where you look out there, there are constraints. And so what it becomes is they can focus their resources on honing into a more realistic area right off the bat. And that can save a lot of time and money and, frankly, heartache. So when you're looking at how to plan for an additional use, in this case offshore renewable energy, the National Ocean Policy is sort of guiding us to work with all constituents to find the best area with the least conflict out there with other uses.
We're talking to a lot of industry, commerce, aquaculture, energy, fishermen, recreational users, to get a sense of where they see their future going. Aquaculture hasn't even really gotten out of the gate in terms of citing its own use offshore. They have an urgency here to sort of understand how their use might be compatible with existing uses. Commerce has very clearly talked about more shipping on the water, more commerce in terms of the Panama Canal being deepened, the Arctic opening.
75% of the U.S. goods and services, their imports and exports, are done through our ocean highways. That accounts for about $1.1 trillion worth of goods that come across our borders through the ocean highways. Any disruption to these commercial highways can cause a significant impact to our overall economy as well as the global economy. The Navy's mission is to protect those highways, to make sure that we have access to those highways so we can operate in them safely and transport those goods and services.
Those types of very important uses to our economy need to be planned in a more comprehensive way and in the context of all these other important uses, in addition to the natural resources that we need to be considering on this larger regional scale, like whales, birds, marine mammals, turtles. You really do need to take a step back and look regionally. It's not the feds who are the experts here, it's the states. They are the seasoned leaders around this table that are most closely connected to their own state's economies, to the coastal communities.
My name is Tom Burak. I am one of New Hampshire's 2 representatives to the regional planning body. And we're also joined by several other members of the regional planning body this afternoon, including Doug Grout, who is the representative for the New England Fisheries Management Council. In addition, we have Dan Hubbard from the U.S. Coast Guard, right there, and we have Betsy Nicholson from the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. Again, we're really excited that this process is underway.
Although we may not have a lot of coastal mileage, the coast is still a very important part of our history, part of our culture, part of our economy. If we failed to undertake this work, we would see ever-increasing tensions and conflicts over our oceans, and people finding themselves in very contentious situations, whether it's wind energy projects trying to be built in places where fishing interests don't want to see those things occurring, whether it's other kinds of energy development projects occurring in places where they might interfere with recreational activities or shipping lanes. We're just going to see ever-increasing tensions and conflicts if we don't find a way together to address them. By working together, we have much greater impact.
So what is that?
This, in many ways, is about the rights of states. This is very much about states' rights. This is about states being able to sit as equals at the table with the feds and saying, these are our concerns. You need to hear us. We need to address them. And that, I think, is vitally important as well.
In addition to the Northeast, the U.S. National Ocean Policy identified 8 ocean regions: the Mid-Atlantic, the South Atlantic, the Gulf of Mexico, the Caribbean, the West Coast, Alaska and the Arctic, the Pacific Islands, and the Great Lakes. The National Ocean Policy calls for these regions, if they so choose, to develop a plan for how their offshore waters will be developed or not. It's a plan that calls on everyone's voice.
Part of the advantage working on the water day in and day out is that you start to see the realities of climate change. We may be poor dumb fishermen, but we know that lobsters shed 4 weeks earlier than they almost ever have. And then you read the scientific data afterwards that the whole Gulf of Maine was so many degrees warmer over that year. So even if we wanted to have our heads in the sand, it wouldn't last very long. One way or the other, you're torn between the fear of being displaced somehow out there in the water and realizing that we have to maintain a healthy resource, a healthy ocean, a healthy resource. And those decisions are being made now, so I'd like to participate and I'd like to help.
There's Navy interest, there's Air Force interest, there's Marine Corps interest, so there's Coast Guard interest. And all of those have to be balanced to ensure that, one, we're able to support the commerce that we'd like to sustain, manage our energy needs through this alternative energy and initiatives, but at the same time, maintain our proficiency in our operating forces so that we can safely protect those economic interests as well.
This entire process of coastal and marine spatial planning is singularly and solely about us, about people. What's different about it is that instead of just thinking about the people alive today, for the first time, we're thinking seriously about our children, our grandchildren, and our great-grandchildren. We're thinking about sustainability. What's going to be increasingly important in the future is replenishment, restoration of renewable resources. And what we're restoring is not just the number of fish or the beauty of the coastline, but its ability to continually renew itself. So this planning is not just for the next 5 years. It's for the next 500 years.